Hi, welcome to Drama 203, lecture number 4. Today we are going to be talking about this article briefly, and then we're going to move on to a couple other topics that I want to kind of dig into. But I included this, so Wired to Create, Unraveling the Mysteries of the Creative Mind. It is a little bit more science-y, for lack of a better word. And I included it because the conversation about creativity can get a little very subjective, almost wishy-washy. Again, the Rick Rubin, spirituality stuff. And for some, that is a great way into creativity and process. For others, it's a barrier because maybe they don't think that way, or they weren't brought up that way, or they don't have access to that kind of space. So it can really turn people off. Creativity is not some kind of nebulous, weird, subjective thing that exists. It's science. There's wiring in the brain that kind of makes this happen. Now, I am not a doctor. As mentioned last week in my thing, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to really dig into the the neurological wirings and all that. The article kind of talks about dopamine and talks about even another connection to mental health and mental illness and all this. And the article will do that for you. I would like to kind of point out a few things within the article to add a little larger context. It's called openness to experience. And as a concept, this is something that I have been preaching for years. And I talk about it in my larger lecture classes, especially in the fall, which is Intro to the Study of Drama, which is a big 120 student intro course, right? Half the class is in the arts and the other half are taking it as an elective. And we get into the big names. And I might have mentioned this before, but at one of the things we'll talk about Hamlet and Shakespeare. And some people really like it. A lot of people roll their eyes, especially if you're not kind of knee deep in the arts. I fall into the category of Shakespeare is very important and we must study him, but you don't have to like him. And this starts a larger conversation when I ask people to go see shows to watch, as part of a class, or, what have they seen? And a lot of times it's the general mainstream work. So I go to Alberta Theatre Projects. I go to Theatre Calgary. I go here, and that's fine. I'm not judging that. No judgment. But what I ask people to do is maybe try and find something different, something weird, or something kind of outside of their comfort zone, whether that's a theater performance, whether that's a concert, whether that's an art installation. A lot of people seem to have a rough time with just going to a museum because maybe they don't understand the art or it's boring or whatever. So what I try and do, what I ask the students to do, is remove the judgment of I like or I dislike this. Like, that's not important for this conversation. But what is important to the conversation is the experience. So you go to a show and it's not really your thing. Or, if you had to choose, you maybe wouldn't choose this show. So can you sit there and just experience the work? Can you just be in that moment and leave judgment or qualifying it in some way for later or for a different conversation? The idea, the conceptual idea behind all this is without new input, and I think this is what they're kind of getting into here to a certain extent. Without new input, without bringing new things into your subconscious and into your brain and idea-making wiring, without that, you are going to be running in circles and creativity will be kind of sapped. There won't be anything left because you have run out of inspiration, impulse, the filing cabinet's empty because you're not bringing in new information. This doesn't mean that you have to run around and try and find as many different things that you're uncomfortable with as possible. That's not what I'm saying. And this doesn't necessarily need to have any direct focus or directional kind of thing towards something you're finishing. whether it's making art or nothing. This could just be a life thing, right? The more experiences you have, the fuller your life will become, because you'll just have more access to different concepts, different opinions, different worldviews. And again, this doesn't mean, if we look at social media and it's like, you have to travel, you have to do all this stuff. Sorry for the voice. Like, sometimes that can be intimidating. When someone says, oh, you need to travel and you need to see all these different countries and this is the only way to live. Well, for someone, let's say, who doesn't have as many means financially to do that, well, then what does that mean? Are they not experiencing life to the fullest if they haven't done that? There's value for sure, but it doesn't have to be that. It could, literally be going for a walk at a different time of day. It could literally be going to that museum that maybe you've walked by 100 times, or the little art gallery on the side street that is just there. Walk in, take a look, spend 10, 15 minutes, look at what's around there. There's no one size fits all. And we have to make sure that, we don't kind of influentially bully people out of trying new things. So we have to make sure that we open this up to what experience means, and that there is value in all of the experiences you have. Now, it's new experiences as well. The new is kind of important there, because again, if you're just doing the same thing, one, there's routine, you might get bored, you might, and then maybe there's joie de vivre is not really there anymore. So can you find just new things to watch, to read, to look at, to go for a drive? This is a weird thing I like to do sometimes. If you have a car, again, I don't want to privilege myself out of this conversation, but I got my first car when I was 45, so there you go. Sometimes I'll go, and because we have the apps and Waze and Google Maps and all this kind of stuff, so I will put the phone away and I'll just drive for 45 minutes to an hour, turning left, turning right, doing whatever. I have no idea where I'm going necessarily. And then I end up someplace, but I'm seeing new streets. I'm seeing maybe streets coming from different directions, which is also sometimes really fun and interesting. And then once I've had my fill, I'll turn my phone on and I'll just, send me home. And then directionally, it'll take me where I need to go. And sometimes I'm an hour away. And sometimes I've driven around in circles and I'm like 20 minutes away from where I'm living. So it's not for any massive value. There's no real direct response to this or benefit to this, but it's just allowing new experiences to exist. So that's where we're kind of going with this. So with this article, it's going to get very sciencey, and they write it well. It's not a medical journal, thankfully, but it's really getting into the idea of dopamine and all this kind of stuff, which I am not a doctor, so I will not necessarily go there, but I want to pull out a few things from this and things that I can talk about. First thing, right on the first page, when they talk about William S. Burroughs, who was one of the kind of avant-garde beat poets, and he talks about this cut-up technique, and the way this is written is that he was experimenting with a new writing strategy, and this would be in the 40s or 50s or 60s. This cut-up technique was done by data artists, in 1910, 1920. Data used to data poetry, so it would be even less than just cutting up sentences. You would cut up words, or you would cut up letters, and then just pull them all out and line them up, and that's what you get. And sometimes it would be sound poems, they called, and it would just be whatever the words sounded like, and that's what you would say. And the data was a movement in response to the violence of the world and the kind of empirical and elitism that was happening, and they wanted to kind of blow it up. And that movement, that energy comes back every couple generations, right? When things get a little too conservative, we need to blow stuff up. It's also important to not put the beat poets on a pedestal. They were regular people, and they were problematic, right? A lot of misogyny, a lot of stuff going on in there. So again, we can look at the art, but don't put these people on a pedestal by any stretch of the imagination. So this is an interesting thing when you read something like this, it's like, oh, William S. Burroughs invented cut-up method. He did not. It's been done for years. The next thing I want to bring up is this idea of focus and kind of distraction. This is a big deal when it comes to talking about creating work and being creative. I don't know if I've mentioned it in the previous lectures, but this idea of procrastination. Procrastination is a wonderful thing, especially in a creative process. I was prepared to record this lecture an hour before I started. I was ready to go. Backdrop set up, lights were set up, tested the mic, everything was great. Oh, and then I washed my dishes and I, cleaned up a little bit and I straightened a few things out. Then I looked on the internet for 20 minutes because I wasn't, let's say, ready to go. Now I know over time and experience that eventually, it's not going to be that I'm not going to do this for 23 hours, but I'll get there. But in that moment, there was other things to do. When they're talking about it here, and I think this is really this idea of, the artist can maybe accused of having a messy mind, or like you go into an artist studio space and it's kind of all over the place. But that's not the norm. There are artist studios that are absolutely immaculate and perfectly clean because that's the only way they can work. So there's no one way to do this. And they talk about this when they talk about Proust and when they talk about Kafka, the way, Proust kept his blinds drawn and lined his bedroom with cork to filter out the unwanted light and noise. Like that's intense. Like that's hardcore. And then Kafka said that he needed the solitude of not a hermit, but of a dead man in order to write. Like just completely almost sensory deprivation so he could focus that. And if in a modern psychological context, medical context, we could diagnose a few things out of that, but we don't have to, and I'm not a doctor. But it's this idea of that kind of sensory focus where there are artists that bring up Basquiat again, who when he was painting, and he was usually working on probably about 3 paintings at the same time, a couple on the wall, one on the floor. He had a TV playing in the corner, maybe playing old movies or the news really loud. He had music playing at the same time, whatever was going on. I think he was a huge jazz lover. He loved classical. And so as he's working, he doesn't need this sensory deprivation. He needs input. And because he was working kind of in the moment, so he would see something on the news, put that into the painting. He would hear something in the music, and it would just inspire him, and he would go. Opposite ways of working. Like you couldn't get more different. Yet both are 100% accurate to the artists that were using them. So however you need, and this takes time to figure out, however you need to work that's how you will work. But this idea of the messy mind and the leaky, what did they call it? The leaky sensory filter. Now, I read this and then I remembered, and I'm going to put it up here and I will link it with the audio underneath, is, again, we're going back to Prince again, is Dr. Susan Rogers and the book that she wrote about the kind of understanding the brain of creativity. And she talks about hyper-creativity. And in that conversation, it's very short, it's about 4.5 minutes, but in this conversation, she is talking about Prince because she worked side by side with him. And the way, and this is what they're getting to here to a certain extent in this thing, is that normally if there's a filter, there is information that I need to get through my day, right? Relevant information. And for the most part, I say that a lot, for the most part, but in a general sense, everyone has a filter and a door, right? So we get input comes in, and then we will filter out the stuff that kind of we need in the moment. Right? I'm driving to work. I need to focus on what I'm doing. I have an assignment due on an entirely different class. I need to focus on that. So we'll be able to kind of only filter through the things that we feel are necessary. And that's kind of just, it helps for just living, right? So you're not walking out in the middle of the street because you're thinking of 12 other things. When she talks about Prince, and there's a bunch of other people that, would fall into this category, but she knows firsthand, is that she called it hyper creativity, where his filter, I don't know where it is actually on the brain, I'm just kind of doing this gesturally, but his filter was broken. That's how she describes it. So his ideas, and it would just be a constant flow. And this goes back into how he recorded. He would come in and do the song. He'd like one song a day. You wouldn't spend 7 days on a snare sound because you had a million ideas building up. There's a downside to this. Absolutely, because you can burn yourself out or you can kind of run into a lot of issues, and it's probably hard to work with other people if you're constantly go, go, go. But then there's the other side, and we can bring back our friend Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and I'll be bringing this book up a little later too, when he talks about the flow state. And that's kind of where I think the Kafka and the Proust, like they're setting themselves up for this kind of flow state, but you don't need to kind of lock yourself away. Flow state is very hard to achieve. And it is basically when you get so focused on a task that you forget time. And they talk about where Prince could work 36 hours in a row on, a couple of songs, and then, walk out in the middle of the day and it was just like no time had passed. Or you're working on a paper and all of a sudden you look up and it's 4 hours later. You get lost in the act or the thing that you're doing, and it becomes this flow state where there's no barriers. Time doesn't matter, other responsibilities don't matter, other people don't matter. And this can get us into trouble too, because we're not necessarily focusing on the rest of life. And I would argue someone like Prince and multiple other kind of very successful artists who get into this kind of workflow, there's probably a bit of tyrant in them because they are go, 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 and then they're looking at people that they have to work with who are not at the same level. And I don't mean talent, but I just mean like work ethic necessarily. So they're go, 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 and somebody maybe has a family and they want to get home for dinner, or they had plans on the weekend that they booked 3 weeks earlier, but now this project has just come up. So why don't you cancel all that? It can get into that. I would maybe lump musician-wise, maybe Dave Grohl into that, where, he's got this very pleasant and everyone loves Dave Grohl, but underneath there is a strange push to constantly be doing something. He's got multiple projects always in the go. His band is always touring. They got a new album out and he's on every single promotional podcast or whatever that exists. And it's constant. It never stops. And that can lead to trouble. It can lead to amazing art. And I'm going to not say a certain word, and I will say the word in a moment, but there's a certain word that people like to bring up when you talk about, being really obsessed about something or really hyper-focused on something, or like just this is a thing that is your life and you really want to give it some time. Balance. I will write it here. I don't think balance as a concept exists. I think you could look back at something and say, okay, there was a bit of imbalance or balance there. But to try and find like perfect balance between, let's say, work and life or creativity and schoolwork or whatever it is, I don't think a balance exists. I think it's more, and I'll make a really great graph, right? I think sometimes you're in the moment and other times you're out of the moment. Sometimes you're working hard and other times you're not. And it goes in cycles too of projects. If I have a grant that I'm working on and I'm building a new show, well, for 6 months, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm getting on with my day and I'm doing what I need to do, but, the rest of the brain is kind of working towards that. And then the show stops or the show ends and there's like a week of just, finishing up loose ends. But then I call it the post-show blues, where you kind of dip because you're not actively processing something constantly and it becomes this void. And some people can fall into a bit of a depression. I just call it the post-show blues. And it goes up and down. And then, another project will come in. And then now to kind of, if you were working on something constantly and you had a family and, you can manage that because it's also visible. And this is a different thing when you're talking about the arts. It's so happenstance at times of when you have, did you get some grant money? Did you get a sponsor? Maybe somebody drops out of something. It's never really kind of a constant thing that you can organize as if you would a job where it's 9 to 5. Some people have managed to do that. Absolutely. But for a general sense, I really hesitate using the word you have to find a balance or any of this, because it's a kind of an unrealistic goal in a sense. The same thing when I talk about perfection. It moves, it changes. It's not a real thing, right? It's individual to individual. You have to find a way of working that suits your life. And if there's imbalance in that, but it works for you, awesome. If you can find a relative balance, good for you, great. And the imbalance could be more art or less art. And you just have to figure out where you feel comfortable with that. So, when they kind of talk about these specific artists and how they work and how their brains work, that is, again, it's specific to that artist, and it doesn't mean that this is a one-size-fits-all world. Absolutely not. This at the bottom of page 92, where he says, you never know, some of the most seemingly irrelevant or crazy ideas at one point in time may be just the ingredients for a brilliant insight or connection in a different context. This sounds very similar to pre-creation, right? Of putting stuff on the shelf or being open to ideas. It bears repeating, creativity is all about making new connections. If you get too focused, you're losing input. Achieving a balance between the intellectual, emotional, and aesthetic aspects of openness to experience may increase the chances that surprising and novel connections will arrive and that creativity will not tip over into mental illness. We're getting into different things here. What I want to bring out of this is what I've mentioned before, and I will keep mentioning again. The work is in the doing. If you sit around and wait for the perfect idea, the perfect thing, or you are not available and open to notes or comments or suggestions or to your own new input, you're going to get frustrated. You have to have this openness is very important. And it's in the doing by just making things and seeing where it falls, right? You never know what idea or irrelevant or crazy idea is going to be the thing that opens up an entirely new world for you. If you're just waiting for that, you won't find it. You might, but you probably won't. If you're working and then all of a sudden you're working on one thing and this idea pops up because you're in that flow and you're like, oh, what's this? This is interesting. And, maybe you work on it right away. Maybe you throw away what you've just been doing and now you're working on this. Or you just put it aside, right? Put it on the metaphorical shelf and see what could happen. That it's only in the doing that this happens, right? Action begets action begets action. And so you have to kind of, and it's not, you don't have to obsess about it and be constant, but you have to do. If there's got to be creative doing for these new ideas to exist. It's very important. So to kind of sum up a little bit of this, it's this idea of, and I know that was very more scientific, the reading, not what I just talked about, but it's the idea of focus and distraction, right? You say, well, I can't be distracted because I have to focus. Well, what if being distracted helps you focus? Or, if you're too focused, are you cutting off ideas? So you have to kind of dance between those two things. There are going to be moments when focus is absolutely 100% necessary and you have to really dig into that. And there's going to be moments where focus can loosen up a little bit, right? And you can just be distracted, procrastinate, see what's around, look at things. And so there's a list of 5 or 6 things that if you go on the internet, you'll find lists upon lists upon lists upon lists. And I want to bring up a couple. One that's kind of listed online, and you don't need to know where I get this, but it's, it comes up a lot, is this idea of, creative writings and the dive we did last week, stream of consciousness writing, and even like when people talk about journaling, which I don't do because I'm kind of constantly doing stuff, but I know it's helped a lot of people. Now it can help you in a mental health situation, absolutely, but creatively, it can really kind of allow ideas to flow, especially if you're not putting any pressure or any expectations on the thing you're writing, then your mind can loosen up and you can then find really amazing things. And maybe over the course of 3, 4, 5 days or a week or two, nothing is really jumping up, but you're still doing it. And then again, the doing, all of a sudden, maybe something pops up and it's there. This allows you to participate in creative thinking and creative doing without worrying about an expectation or an outcome, right? It's practice.
We ain't talking about the game. We're talking about practice, man.
You're getting in the zone. You're getting into that mindset. So that's kind of one. And another one that's really, you'll see on almost every list is cultivating curiosity. And I've talked about curiosity before. And I talked about it a bit at the beginning of this lecture, where it's going out and finding things that are new to you. The word new is really important in that, where, and you could revisit something you already know, but see it differently. So see it in a new way. So you're cultivating curiosity. You're not immediately becoming curious because, I don't know your background. I don't know your life. And maybe curiosity wasn't a big part of your household, or it was frowned upon, or it just wasn't available to you. That doesn't mean you don't have it. It just means you need to maybe work on it a little bit.
But we talking about practice, man. What are we talking about?
So you're cultivating it. And why I love that word is that, again, it requires doing. You are actively cultivating your own curiosity. You're not flipping a switch, curious, not curious. You are actively cultivating it. And so that takes time, that takes curation, that takes trial and error, that takes failure, that takes all of these things to create a curious mindset. And again, it doesn't need to be giant epiphanies of, wondrous, life-changing things. It can be the smallest little thing, seeing something differently, noticing a different shade of a color that you hadn't seen before, hearing a word that is kind of fun to say, right? Like, just how does it feel in your face? These are just new, being curious about things, asking questions. You don't necessarily need to have encyclopedic knowledge of the thing you're curious about, but you being curious. Allow your mind to follow. About 6 months ago, I was watching YouTube. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and I stumbled on a video of someone doing bookbinding, leather, old-timey, old-school leather bookbinding in their kind of home studio. Old crafty, not a lot of modern tools. It was a 3-part video series, and it was on YouTube. I could have paused it at any point and just gone to bed at midnight or whatever. I couldn't. I watched all 3. I was up till 1:30 in the morning watching bookbinding for the last 2.5 hours of my day, because I just got so curious about it. And I was like, I needed to see how it ended, and I didn't fast. It was one of those moments where just something caught my attention, and instead of organizing it or trying to manage the curiosity, I just let the curiosity exist. Do I have any new knowledge about bookbinding? I couldn't do it if I don't know how to do that. But just the act, the craft of it, watching someone who really knows what they're doing and seeing how things are. I never knew about the string and the lining and all that. It was just all new and wonderful and fascinating. And so it was just a joy. And that's the thing you have to remember, is that it's not all doom and gloom, and it's not all mining trauma. Sometimes creativity and curiosity is about joy, about just reveling in it, and like, this is making me happy in this moment, and this is great. Okay, it's another thing, just a passing line in this article or these chapters. Why do I keep saying article? From Wired to Create. And it's this book that is referenced by Jeff Colvin called Talent is Overrated. And it's a statement, it's a bold statement. I 100% agree with it. And I've talked about this in different ways. And I want to keep coming back to this. This idea of someone being talented does not mean that they will achieve anything or be open to creativity. And I connect this with this idea of genius. Of, someone is super smart in something, oh, they must be smart in everything. And that's not the case. And we have seen tech bros, in the last couple of years prove that they're kind of moronic in everyday life. And I've seen it in academia as well, where somebody has a PhD in this, but they know nothing about this, right? It's that their zone of focus. And the world dictates that, especially in academia, where you really got to know what you're doing to get, if you want to rise up. But it doesn't translate into everything. Just because you have a PhD or a doctor in a certain subject doesn't mean you know anything about this, right? And so why I like to talk about this is because I think it takes the pressure off a little bit. Yes, there are geniuses. Yes, there are people in the world who can do all these amazing things, but there's a bunch of things they can't do that maybe you can do that they can't. So aren't you, in that scenario, aren't you a genius as well? And then it's also, again, qualifying, because we live in this kind of capitalist societal framework, that, oh, well, they have successful companies. Jeff Bezos made Amazon, and now he's a multi billionaire. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff he's an absolute moron in. I don't know. I've never met him. I don't want to ever. But like, just because he's become successful, and why did he become successful? There was timing. He was at the right time, beginning of the internet, and he had a concept that worked, 100%. And then that built from there, right? Like that. Oh, and then we can expand, and then we get into the whole, nonstop maximizing profits thing, and then things get a little unethical. But it's was this idea perfectly genius 10 years earlier? Probably wouldn't have worked. 10 years later, he would have been too late. So luck and timing played a huge part in that. And you could say that for so many other concepts. The other part of that is privilege. There's a meme that goes around where they say, like, oh, here are the 4 childhood homes of all these, all the people who designed the computer, like Apple and Microsoft and all that. It's like all these companies were, started in a garage. Like, look how, if you don't have anything, like, look at, they're multi-billion companies, and you just need to get started. You're lazy. And it's a weird, kind of bully flex almost. But what they fail to realize is that they had garages. So that maybe implies they lived in suburbia. So that implies that they lived in, middle to upper middle class households. They, had access to different schools. Maybe they were encouraged differently. So, it's not just that these people were amazing and they were geniuses. Stick one of those guys in a poor neighborhood and let's see what happens. Right? And I don't want to elite shame, but it's again, you can't just buy into the surface level bullying of you got to work harder and everything will be fine. And this is why I think creativity is so important to your existence and how you approach things, is because if you stay creative, or if you stay open to experience, you might find a similar idea as somebody else, but maybe through your filter and your lived experience, it's going to be maybe something that'll catch on, or maybe this will be the thing that turns a corner, or could change your life in some way. So I'm meandering a little bit, but I want you just to kind of remember this, right? Just because one person did something one way and we call them a genius now because they are now super rich, maybe it was timing, maybe it was pure luck. And you put yourself in the path, right? As Jeff Tweedy said, right? You put yourself in the path of inspiration. You create your own luck in a sense, but luck is still part of it. So you can't really put extra pressure on yourself because, oh, I did the exact same things and nothing happened. The same thing with art, right? I could write the same script as somebody else, but maybe through their filter, it's more palatable to a certain demographic, and therefore it'll be more successful. Have I failed? No, I wrote a screenplay that existed. So let's kind of allow ourselves that freedom to just, let's remove labels like genius and all this kind of stuff and just be in our moments and see what we can achieve. And this isn't part of the readings, I haven't uploaded this anywhere, but as I was going through this book again, this Csikszentmihalyi, Creativity, there's one thing that I just love, and it's all wordplay. And this is, again, another example of a lot of us are saying the same thing, but we're using different words, and then how you hear maybe certain phrases or certain turns of phrase or certain sayings resonate stronger to you for whatever reason. And this happens in a lot of things. So this idea of, it's in this kind of chapter called The Application of Creative Energy. And in a lot of times when we talk about being creative, like, oh, we're good problem solvers, right? Because we can think creatively, so we can see the different things. We're problem solvers. And this, he coins this thing called problem finding. Be a problem finder. And this connects back to curiosity. And it's super important. Like, find a way to express what moves you. So you're not you're not solving anything, you're finding a problem. I need to figure out a way to express what moves me. All right, there's an issue. Let me see if I can figure this out. Right? You're just moving through these questions. And it's not like you're going out of your way to look for problems, but instead of just trying to solve the problem and move on, which sometimes you have to, be a problem finder. And that, again, totally connected to curiosity. So find a way to express what moves you. Boom. Look at problems from as many viewpoints as possible. So kind of dance around it. Don't try and solve it immediately. Let it sit. Think about it. What if you approached it this way? What might happen? And on and on and on. So there's a line here: creative individuals do not rush to define the nature of problems. They look at the situation from various angles first and leave the formulation undetermined for a long time. That's a wonderful place to be. And I talk about this in my own creative work. I talk about this in writing classes. I talk about this with producers who I'm working with as a dramaturg and creators. You're not rushing to answer questions. So you're not, especially early in a process, you're not trying to find answers. You're trying to find more questions. So instead of like the pyramid going like this, as far as everything is the solution, the end game is here, and everything has to be whittled down, whittled down, whittled down. You'll get there eventually, but kind of turn it upside down. I'll put an image here. Turn it upside down. Build more questions. Approach things differently. The right, in quote, answer for the project you're working on in that moment in time will reveal itself. You don't have to force it. It will show up. But if you don't have this mountain or this kind of inverted pyramid or inverted iceberg of questions, you're just going to grab the first thing. You're going to pre-create. You're just going to rush to it. Okay? Because you have to, we got to get going. We have to move. We have, there's deadlines to meet. Yes and no. Sometimes you do need to answer something quickly, 100%. But if you don't rush to answer it. Just let it sit. And I think that's the kind of gist of problem finding, right? Just more questions, more questions, more questions, more questions. Questions can lead to conversations. Questions can lead to just thinking about things and marinating on something and having new things pop up because you're allowing it to exist. Just let the question hang there. If you are still doing, if you're working, and then you can put it aside and then work on something else. And if you're doing that in the doing, over time, and maybe trying it different ways without choosing one immediately, the right solution to whatever it is you're working on will reveal itself in the doing. If you force it, maybe you luck out and you find the right solution. But if you have some time to marinate, let it, and then build towards that. Another thing I want to talk about, which is not scientific at all. Maybe it is, but I don't have a book for it. It's the idea of vulnerability. And if you are staying open, if you're open to experiences, if you're open to new challenges, if you are, going to places, leaving your comfort zone, it is a very vulnerable place to exist. And at times, maybe the strength isn't there. And that's the world we live in, and that's you managing your existence. Right? It's not, you can't force these things. So maybe sometimes if you got a little extra energy and you're feeling pretty good, well, take that extra step. Leave that comfort zone. And if you're not feeling it, if you need some energy, you got to conserve, well, then maybe you stay where you are for a time, but you can't live there. Vulnerability is it's the idea of being exposed, especially when we're talking about creativity, is you are sharing a part of yourself. And I want to connect this loosely to some of the one pagers that you've been handing in about your creative troll. And there is this, it's a lot of them were very vulnerable and kind of exposing a bit of themselves, and that can be terrifying. And you have to figure out a way to manage that for yourself. But there's always something to remember with that the vulnerability and the exposure can feel in the moment to be quite terrifying and quite intense. Especially, let's say, if public speaking is still high up on that list of fear and terror. But most of the time, especially in a creative setting, the thing we're revealing, which can make us quite vulnerable, can't really hurt us. And then we have to ask ourselves this in certain ways where it's if let's say we offer something and maybe somebody laughs. That could be a little bit embarrassing, but it also says much more about the person laughing than it does about yourself. Right? You took that step and this person decided to judge you about it. It's very easy to, or if you trip going up a flight of stairs, whatever, and everyone sees it and maybe a few people laugh, whatever, it's a little embarrassing. If that's done in a kind of busy part of, let's say, the city, or if you're doing that on the C train or something, 10 minutes, no one's going to remember, one, that it happened. Or if they do, they don't know who you are. And so they might tell a story of somebody who tripped and it was hilarious, but there's no reference to you as a being. So we have to kind of embrace vulnerability a little more, especially when we're being creative. So that whether that's in our writing, whether that's in the art we make, and understand that it can feel terrifying, it can feel intense, but it is not. Those feelings are real. I'm not minimizing your feelings, but it's not going to hurt you in the long term. It could strengthen you, absolutely, right? Or maybe it could ask you to take a step backwards for that moment because maybe that was too intense. But that doesn't mean stopping. And there's sayings and people say, well, just keep moving forward. You always got to move forward. You can never move backwards. And I argue that because sometimes, if you've ever watched boxing, sometimes you have to take a step back to avoid a punch. And sometimes that's the right move. So taking a step back is not a failure. Taking a step back is not being unkind to yourself or betraying yourself in any way. It's also a place to reflect. If you are constantly moving forward, there's very little time for reflection. And I think reflection and creativity is amazingly important. Find that downtime to just, what did I just do? Right? Take a step back and look at the thing metaphorically or literally of what you just created, whether that's on the page, whether that's, on a canvas, whether that's, an art installation somewhere else, or maybe it's a science thing or a tech thing. You need to reflect on what just happened. What worked? What didn't? What parts do you really, connect with? What parts do you think are going? We're going to cut angles for a second, and I'm going to show you something. That's one of my paintings. 3 years ago, I finished some of this, and then last month, I painted over it, put some letters on it. This is kind of a new thing I'm trying with. Is this any good? I have no idea, and it doesn't matter. But why I'm showing you this is this is part of this idea of allowing things to go, reflecting, giving things time, letting things marinate. So I finished it, and then it was off in the corner, stacked with some others. But I never fully connected with it. Right? It's a thing I finished, but it didn't really move me. So it was just there, and it became kind of a bit of an itch, right? Where it's like, I don't want to show that to anybody, or I don't really love it. But so when the time was right, I pulled it out, I put it back together, I hung up on the wall, and then we went to town, and I created this. Is this better? It makes me feel better. So this is the concept of the doing and with working creatively of you're always taking a few steps forward, you're looking at something, you don't have to fix things right away. This took 3 years of sitting in the corner before I brought it back. Because other things were happening, I was doing other work, and the time became right. So you don't have to rush these things. You can let them exist. Now, if you're in a school situation, I totally understand that you have to hand things in. But in a general sense, when we're talking about creativity, allow time to exist within that process. We're back at the wall. So to wrap up, stay open, focus, distraction, two sides of the same coin. Be curious. Cultivate curiosity. Absolutely. Be a problem finder, right? Which is the other side or the same side of curiosity. Just go out there and find stuff. And stay open. And the final little anecdote here is I'm teaching a class on writing for performance at the same time. And this happens every time I teach the class where somebody has, put in an assignment. This is their synopsis. This is their story outline. It's one of the assignments. And I will throw 12 different ideas at them. Say, oh, I like what you did here, but I don't understand this. What if you tried that? What if you tried that? I'm not telling them what to do. I'm just throwing different options at them. And without fail, there are a few that will just resist because, no, this is what I want to do. This is my idea. So they will defend. It was no, it's because of this. Might not be on the page, but, to them, they understand that. And that's 100% fine. Like, your vision needs to be your vision. And I've talked about this a lot too, because it's very easy, especially in film, where people, your story can get mainstreamed or made a little bit more conservative or palpable to a larger audience, and then your voice is gone. I'm not saying that you should not retain your voice. What I'm saying is early in a process, early in a career, if you're an emerging writer and you are not listening to suggestions, and again, not suggestions to rewrite or this is a better way, but just options. Again, the questions going out like this. And I'll throw it, what about this? What about this? Well, I don't see that. And then you start arguing psychology of the character and you start getting into it. And a lot of times there's just resistance. I understand where that comes from because I've been there. I've felt that. And I understand it. It's you don't understand my voice or you're not understanding what I'm trying to say. And it's not necessarily that. Right? A lot of times it's just I'm looking at it through my filter. You've written it in your being, and now I'm looking at it and reading it in my being. And so I might have different references. I might have a larger, if I'm, been around a little longer, so maybe my frame of reference or the tools that I have to work with are a little broader. And there's this resistance. And this always comes back to, now I'm going to relate it to teaching. Because a lot of times we can get into a situation like that. Let's say I hand in a piece of work and it's like, oh, well, what about these things? And I'm like, no, it's this and that. You don't understand my work. And it can turn into very defensive. And a defensive posture creatively is always about other forces. Right? You don't understand what I'm saying. It's nepotism. It's just a bunch of friends working together, all these things. You can just blame a bunch of things. Not to say that some of those might be accurate, but that's, we can do that. What we need to do as well, and this, my teaching guru in Montreal, a good man, and, taught me like 4 different courses in university. And his question to me every time, because I will email him if I'm having an issue with a class or I'm struggling with a certain thing. And his first question, and I know it's going to be there, but I need him to ask it, is, what are you doing? What are you bringing into this? What kind of energy are you bringing into this? And there's a couple of anecdotes in some books here and there where it's like, let's say, oh, I didn't get a promotion because my boss doesn't like me. Well, flip that. You don't like the boss. So maybe that energy is going out. So the same thing when you start defending your work is that you're putting all of this on, well, your ideas are not what I'm doing. You're giving me the wrong information. Instead of maybe listening to that and going, okay, why am I resisting? One, justified resistance. Why am I resisting? And why don't I just look at all this stuff? What's stopping me from reflecting and ingesting some of these thoughts? And I can reject all of them. Totally 100%. That's your work. You can do what you want. But if it's just a push immediately, instinctual negation. If you're just pushing, you have to now turn that onto yourself. You always start with you if there's resistance. What am I bringing into this? What kind of energy am I thing? Or am I just, is right now, today, I'm just extra sensitive and this is not the right time to give me notes? Those are all 100% legit things, but you have to kind of check yourself. So always make sure that you are not the barrier for your own creativity. Get out of your own way. And this all connects back to focus and curiosity and all of these things, right? Openness, questions, more questions, and not just shutting it down and, relying on your own genius or your own sense of self-worth. You are not diminishing yourself by listening to notes. It's just not. And you don't have to accept them, but you do need to hear them and listen to them. So cultivate curiosity, become a problem finder. How we doing? We're 4 lectures in. I'm loving the submissions for the Creative Troll. I'm very excited to see where the videos go. Very excited. Just a reminder that there is a discussion post about creativity in education that should go up today. And the quiz should be available tomorrow, or if this is Tuesday, quiz should be available either tonight or tomorrow morning, and that is due on Friday. So check your dates. Thank you so much. Thank you for hanging around. Be creative. Take care of yourself. Look after yourself. And I will see you next week.
Practice? We're talking about practice, man.